Bryan Kohberger pled guilty to killing 4 students in Idaho. At the hearing, the prosecution outlined the factual basis of their case. How would the defense have tried to undermine it had the trial gone forward? Unreliable cell phone data? DNA problems? Questionable police procedure? The tactics that won the Karen Reed case might have come into play. What's left for Bryan Kohberger at his sentencing? All that and what it means for your weekend on the Comm Center. Wake up, America. It's the Comm Center with Drew Breasy. It's a TV show on the internet about 2 best friends who are called by a small-town sheriff to investigate when something is overheard said about his mother in a cornfield. I'm Jon. I'm an actual 911 dispatcher. I've been doing that in my community for 10 years. I'm joined, as always, by my podcasting partner with police benefits. That's Andrew Baxter, but he goes by Drew Breasy on the internet. Fake name, authentic cop. Drew, we're talking today about the Bryan Kohberger case. He just had a change of plea hearing on July 2nd. We're looking at sentencing later this month. It's been an interesting case. I can remember back in July of 2022, it shocked the nation, grabbed everybody's attention. We have a full episode of breaking down the case with a 911 call and the stressed out 911 dispatcher. And so my remarks you can watch here. But Drew, what were your initial feelings, or what was your impression, or what surprised you when Bryan Kohberger was finally heard in court speaking openly about committing these crimes?
Owning up to it, taking responsibility is kind of rare these days, and it's not necessarily rare in exchange for taking the death penalty off of the table. And I think that that is probably one of the most weighty decisions that a prosecutor is ever going to have to make. The state, at the end of it, completely breaks down what their case would have been, so that the judge can make a determination if there actually was a case. And I think you'll find all that to be interesting.
The defendant is present in custody with counsel in the states present. All right. We are here today to entertain a change of plea. Before I start, I want to address some issues of concern and otherwise. I want to point out that there have been calls by some for the public to contact me and my office in an attempt to influence my decision-making in this case. This has been extraordinarily disruptive for court staff and the ability for them to get work done, not only in this case, but in other cases where defendants are entitled to have their cases processed and, frankly, as important, if not more so, for victims to have their cases processed in those cases.
It's something we brought up in the Karen Reed trial, John, where I think what gets lost in the shuffle is, like, that's not the only case going on right now. We brought that up in the Sarah Boone case. Like, this is not the only case going on. Therefore, you got to give the courts the opportunity, the state the opportunity, and that defendant or the defendants of the other case the opportunity to have a fair and proper trial. It's not that all roads lead to just this one defendant. It's just that that's the media circus part of it.
It's also highly inappropriate. A court is not supposed to, and this court will never, take into account public sentiment in making an opinion regarding its judicial decisions in cases. Court should, and I always will, make decisions based on where the facts and the law lead me. Period. I have not read any of the numerous messages nor listened to any of the numerous voicemails that have been sent to me and my staff. Those have all been forwarded to security and, where appropriate, to law enforcement.
In my role as a detective, when I worked in intelligence, we handled anything deemed sensitive by the sheriff. And amongst those were like threats to assistant state attorneys, and threats to public defenders, and threats to judges. And believe me, that pipeline gets used quite a bit.
I ask that you not continue to mount such campaigns or to send me information like this, because, again, it is not appropriate and, frankly, not something I would take into account when deciding a matter in a case like this. I also want people to understand some very basic concepts about the ideas of separation of powers, what the court's duties are, and what the duties and the rights of the executive, or in this case, the prosecuting attorney, is. Uh, the executive, the elected prosecutor, is the sole authority in deciding what charges to pursue, including whether, as well as what penalties to ask for, and what penalties to pursue, including the death penalty. This court cannot require the prosecutor to seek the death penalty, nor would it be appropriate for this court to attempt to do that. This court, in considering a plea agreement, if it were to reject this plea agreement, cannot force the state to seek the death penalty. My role and power in considering a plea agreement is extremely limited. My role is to ensure that the defendant's plea is given freely, voluntarily, and intelligently. If those things are met, I can only reject a plea, such as the one in this case, where I'm not being asked to agree to the sentence in advance. I can only reject it, for example, if the defendant does not meet or admit to all of the elements of the crime. That is, I can ensure what is called a factual basis to the plea. I, like most everyone else, learned of this plea agreement Monday afternoon and had no inkling of it beforehand. Prior to that time, I was under the belief that this case was proceeding to trial, as had been indicated, and my staff and I were busy continuing to work on preparations to have potentially 10,000 citizens of Ada County come to jury duty starting in mid-July. It was, once I learned of the defendant's decision to change his plea in this case, it was important that I take the plea as soon as possible because of the extraordinary administrative efforts that were otherwise attendant to the process of this, getting this trial potentially underway on time, and including the significant process of bringing, again, potentially up to 10,000 jurors to come in and fill out juror questionnaires prior to the beginning
Big
of the
cost.
process.
Right.
And so it was important that we, if we're going to go down this road, do so expeditiously so that we can avoid those costs and expenses associated with that.
You know what struck me about this, John, is probably the seethe that the victims' families feel when he says that. I know exactly what he's saying. Like, he's trying to avoid the circus, and he's trying to avoid the media attention, and he's trying to avoid the management aspects of trying to get this guy a fair trial, and he's trying to avoid all these things, like having to poll 10,000 people and whittle it down to 16 jurors, 12 and 4, whatever they do in Idaho. But the family is like, you're looking at this from a monetary standpoint.
Right.
You know what I mean?
They wanted the emotional catharsis. They wanted the fight and they wanted to win.
Right. And I wonder how much of that too would be like the avoidance of having to be drugged through like another fire. Like, they've already been drugged through a fire and they've already been burnt, very badly. So like having to go through this trial again would be being drugged through yet another fire.
In a sense, though, just by being emotionally ready for it over the last, 2.5, 3 years, by preparing themselves for it, whatever, trauma that goes along with, not being able to move on because you have no closure. I mean, they've already been in the midst of that. And in
Yeah.
a sense, they're, like I said, they're just being robbed of that catharsis to prove that everything that they vested themselves in for the last 2.5 to 3 years was for something. It was meant for a definitive victory of their moment of truth, for them to go out, and that is a trial for Bryan Kohberger, but also a trial of the value of their children, which was deprived from them in a vicious act of cruelty. They wanted all that proven. They didn't just want him to get up there and say, yeah, I did these things. Hey, before you do anything else, make sure you're doing all those YouTube things. Hit like, hit subscribe, and there's a good chance that we said something by now that was inaccurate or pissed you off. So go ahead and leave a comment below and we'll get back to you. Drew?
The easy way out. Right.
Right.
Yeah. Look, I don't question 1 second that they would have gone through the fire, just again. I don't question that for 1 second. Like, I don't think it's a second thought almost, but, it's just it's a weighty decision. Just like I said at the top of the show, it's a very weighty decision to have to say, look, we're going to offer this guy a plea agreement to just plead guilty to all 5 charges, and he's never going to be able to appeal, and he's never going to be able to get out. But I can also see where the families are like, yeah, but his parents can call him on Easter, you know?
Have you had enough time to decide whether or not to plead guilty?
Yes.
Are you pleading guilty freely and voluntarily?
Yes.
Given your choices, do you believe it's in your best interest to plead guilty?
Yes.
Have you discussed fully the matter of pleading guilty with your attorney, and are you satisfied with the advice you've received?
Yes.
Do you understand those things the state would have had to have proven?
Yes.
And do you understand that by pleading guilty, the state no longer has to prove those things because you're admitting those things are true?
Yes.
And then let me ask you, did you, on November 13th, 2022, enter the residence at 1122 King Road in Moscow, Idaho, with the intent to commit the felony crime of murder?
Yes.
Did you, on November 13th, 2022, in Latah County, state of Idaho, kill and murder Madison Mogan, a human being?
Yes.
And did you do that willfully, unlawfully, deliberately, and with premeditation and malice aforethought?
Yes.
Did you, on or about that same date in Moscow, Idaho, kill and murder Kaylee Gonzalez, a human being?
Yes.
And did you do that willfully, unlawfully, deliberately, and with premeditation and malice aforethought?
Yes.
And did you, on that same date in Moscow, Idaho, kill and murder Xana Kernodle, a human being?
Yes.
And did you do that willfully, unlawfully, deliberately, with premeditation and malice aforethought?
Yes.
And then on or about November 13th, 2022, again in Latah County, Idaho, did you kill and murder Ethan Chapin, a human being?
Yes.
Did you do that willfully, unlawfully, deliberately, with premeditation and malice aforethought?
Yes.
I would ask the state.
It's all pretty bothersome, the way that he robotically just kind of goes through it. I know that he was prepared for this moment, that the lawyers told him exactly what the judge was going to say, that he needed to just say yes to everything. You have to wonder, to get through it, is he dissociating? Like a normal person would just have to wait for the pauses and what the judge is saying to just say yes. And almost like the way when you drive home, you don't pay attention to every little thing and you wonder, how did I get here? You're kind of on autopilot. Or is he really a full-blown psychopath where he can be presented with the cold facts of the case? So these 4 people, these human beings, you just decided to get in there and kill them. Yes, I did that. And of course, what bothers all of us is the dispassionate uh, stance of the law and of the court, because the question that we all have that the judge isn't asking,
Why?
why? Why did you wake up that morning or get up that evening and decide, why did you order the knife and the sheath and go through all this? Why did you decide to take these people away from us? And we're always going to wonder, unless he elocutes to that or writes a book or gives, the next Netflix documentary, bothers to tell somebody or gives an interview or something to explain himself. Other people have done that in the past, like people like Ted Bundy and things like that. But the law is not really concerned with why, just whether or not he did do it. And this is something that I've addressed a lot on true crime shows, is that the motive is definitely helpful to understand why someone might have committed a crime or why they're a good suspect or why you believe that they did it. But ultimately, this right here proves that you don't have to prove a motive at all. The prosecution might have been able to lay out a case for some sort of emotional jealousy or something. Who knows what it all would have been in a great detail. But ultimately, the law just doesn't care why it happened, even though all of us do. Drew?
Right. It's a fine line, the motive and intent part of this whole thing. He's admitting to the intent, but you're right. The motivation is largely important for the victims and their families and for the people. When you think about it, because the district attorney is representing the people. So it's important to understand what would make somebody do that. I had a rabbi suggested in my YouTube feed. I listened to a nice 10 or 15-minute message of his this morning, and it was so poignant about, he was actually the victim of a mass shooting back in 2019 at a synagogue. And
Is that the one
it's
of
just,
Texas or?
I'm thinking it was Pittsburgh.
Okay.
We'll have to look. But his message was just so like, they weren't born with that. You know, Bryan Kohberger wasn't born with that. And you know, and this white supremacist walked into his synagogue, wasn't born with that. It's something that's taught. And basically what he was saying is putting a moment of silence back into schools would help remedy some of this. Not pushing religion, but just a moment of silence, some a reflection, so that a kid who's having these thoughts might go home and question, is there a God, or ask a religious like counselor of some sort, or their parents, like, is there a God? You know, he's just saying, just a simple moment of silence would put essentially kind of put religion back into this. It would put thought back into this, because we've come a long way. We've separated way too much.
I don't know. I mean, my experience with murderers is such that, and I've talked to many of them, and I wouldn't have such directed conversations about them, but I mean, I would interact with them daily, and you say that they're not born that way. They're definitely missing something, though. There's an element of compassion or humanity in them that has either been banished by them or they were born without. But they're definitely missing something, and they're unpleasant people to be around, and not just rude, but they're unsettling.
Yeah, I can see that. I That's great perspective from the time you worked in corrections. I mean, like, there was a guy I interviewed one time. He was in jail for murder, but we were interviewing him as his part of an escape plot. And he was in a separate housing area, where they just, you know, it was just like individual cells. It was a 23-hour in one type situation. And the pod was in the middle for the um, detention deputy to keep his eye on, you know, everybody in their respective cells, but they were all in their own cells. So we get back in there, and he's looking out through the tiny little window that he has, and I have never seen somebody so soulless. Like, I was looking into just a soulless human being in this window. It was like a picture. It was a bizarre picture frame.
Mhm,
Somebody without a soul.
mhm.
And in talking to him, I got the same kind of heebie-jeebies that you're talking about. Like, he's definitely missing something in life. And like, maybe his badge of honor is that he's already done like, he's committed the ultimate commandment. What's left? So, you know, maybe his mindset really does totally change, like before, during, or after. But um, I get what you're saying. That's a
And
great perspective.
speaking of just the corrections officers, just to make mention of them, this guy's going away for the rest of his life. I don't know what kind of guy he is. I don't know what kind of inmate he's going to be, but he killed 4 people, which means that we're the the commentary has been made that society's safe. Well, there's a whole other society inside the walls of other inmates and correctional officers that are now susceptible to the ongoing danger that Bryan Kohberger presents to the rest of his life. I just want to put that out there that we
Yeah.
tend to wash our hands of these problems and say it's all done. He's going to adult corrections and it's solved. But for the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years, generations of new inmates that are already there, and officers, people that protect the communities in Idaho, are going to be in danger from him. And I have seen inmates who are confined 23 hours a day still pose a grievous risk to other people. So uh, Bryan Kohberger will either be somebody that is a danger or not, and only he can decide that. And he's going to have plenty of opportunities for the rest of his life.
Mm.
This time to provide its recitation of its factual basis had this case gone to trial.
Thank you, Your Honor. Your Honor, the organization of the resuscitation is different than what I think the court and the public may be familiar with from the probable cause affidavit and other documents. The state's evidence, as an overview, would show that back in March of 2022, when the defendant was residing in his parents' residence or residing back in Pennsylvania, his home state, he purchased online a K-bar knife and sheath with an Amazon gift card that he had purchased shortly prior to the purchase of the knife, sheath, and sharpener. Jumping ahead, the end of June of that year, the defendant, Mr. Kohberger, moved from Pennsylvania to Pullman, Washington, which is right across the state line from Moscow, Idaho, for the purpose of pursuing a PhD in criminal justice at Washington State University. The state's evidence would indicate that beginning July 9th of 2022, Mr. Kohberger's phone began connecting to a cell tower that serves the area of the 1122 King Road residence in Moscow, Idaho. Now, I will acknowledge for the court and all present that there are many residences in that area. It's a dense population of mostly college-related occupants. Between July 9th of 2022 and November 7th, the defendant's phone connected to that particular tower during late night, early morning hours, 10 p.m. to 4 a.m., on approximately 23 times. Now, I will acknowledge also, we do not have evidence that the defendant had direct contact with 1122 or with residents of 1122, but we can put his phone in that area on those times. In the interim, on August 22nd of 2022, Lake Tahoe County Sheriff's Deputy Darren Duke conducted a traffic stop in the early morning hour or late evening hours, about 11 p.m. On the west side of Moscow on the Moscow-Pullman Road. This was the traffic stop of Mr. Kohberger's car, which turned out to be a 2015 white Hyundai Elantra with Pennsylvania plates. During the course of the traffic stop, Deputy Duke was able to obtain Mr. Kohberger's name, Bryan Kohberger, his phone number, and his address, which at that point was an apartment address in Pullman. We then move to the early morning hours of November 13th, 2022. The state's evidence would show that early morning hours on that day, Mr. Kohberger's phone left his Pullman residence, which is an apartment in kind of the central northwest part of Pullman. That phone was then subsequently off at approximately 2:54 a.m. and remained off until approximately 4:48 a.m. on Sunday, the 13th of November. The state's evidence would include a trial, video surveillance of a business on the Moscow-Pullman Highway just across the state line from Moscow that would show a vehicle matching the description of the defendant's Hyundai Elantra entering Moscow at approximately 3:02 a.m. Compiled surveillance that the investigators put together from businesses and residents then show the defendant's car, the white Elantra, as I've described, circling the 1122 King Road area, that neighborhood, starting around 3:30 or so in the morning. Comes into the immediate area of the 1122 King Road, which is actually on a dead end, and then leaves several times. And approximately 4:05 that morning, the defense car had entered that area, was leaving, stopped at the intersection of King and Queen Road, did a U-turn, and the state's evidence would show that the defendant's car came back and parked behind and above the 1122 King Road residence. Believes that its evidence would then show that the defendant entered the residence of 1122 through the kitchen sliding door on the back side of the residence, which is the side of the residence that would face the area above where the defendant's car was parked. Defendant entered the residence, went to the third floor, and with a knife, killed Madison Mogan and Kaylee Gonzalez. The defendant, as he left that room, for whatever reason, ended up leaving, or the sheath for a K-bar knife was left on the bed next to Madison Mogan's body. And I can jump ahead. That sheath was tested by the Idaho State Police Forensic Lab, and single source male DNA was found on the snap of that sheath, as well as blood from both Kaylee and Madison and other trace evidence. But it's important to note single source male DNA was on the snap of that sheath. The state's evidence would show that Xana Knodel was still awake at this time. In fact, had taken a DoorDash order not long before this started. Her room was not on the 3rd floor. It was on the 2nd floor on the west side. As the defendant was either coming down the stairs or leaving, he encountered Xana, and he ended up killing her, also with a large knife. Ethan Chapin, Xana's boyfriend, was asleep in her bedroom, and the defendant killed him as well with a large fixed blade knife. Each victim suffered multiple wounds. I will state for the record that there is no evidence there was any sexual component or sexual assault on any of the victims. I want to make that clear so there's no speculation. There were 2 other roommates in the house, and they were already asleep. During the course of this, one of those roommates awoke, looked out her door not knowing what was going on, and saw the defendant, who was dressed in black with a black balaclava on, holding some sort of container in his hand. And she saw him leave the house through the direction of the kitchen to where that sliding door is that I mentioned before. At approximately 4:20 that morning, so this would have been 15 minutes or so later, defendant's car is seen on a surveillance camera for 1112 King Road, which is immediately next door to the west of 1122, leaving the area at a high rate of speed. And if the court were to see that, or anybody in this courtroom would see that, you can see the car almost loses control as it makes the corner, heads north, and then turns to go south on Walenta, which is one of the only ways to get out of that part of town. The evidence would show that following that, the defendant in his Elantra drove south of Moscow. We know that he drove on the back roads because there are surveillance cameras on the main highways, Highway 95, that would have picked up the defendant's car if he'd gone that route. And they did not show the defendant's car on that route during the time. So we know that he went through a variety of back roads in very rural, isolated part of Latah County. About 4:48 that morning, defendant's phone comes back on. And the evidence will show that that phone was located south of Moscow, likely at a side road intersection with Highway 95. From there, the defendant's phone activity tracks it heading back north towards Pullman, Washington, where the defendant lived. About 5:26, starting approximately 5:26, various surveillance cameras in Pullman, Washington pick up the defendant's vehicle as he enters Pullman from the south and heads north and slightly west towards his apartment, where he arrives at approximately 5:30 in the morning. Later that morning, Sunday, the 13th of November of 2022, Mr. Kohberger's phone returned to the area of King Road. We don't know exactly what he did, but it returned to that area. It's about 9 o'clock in the morning. It was there for about 10 minutes and then returned to his Pullman residence. About 9:30, the state's evidence will show, evidence taken from the defendant's phone, that he took a selfie of himself on his phone in what appears to be the bathroom of his Pullman apartment with a thumbs up. The defendant's phone then went to the Lewiston-Clarkston Valley, approximately 30 miles south of Moscow and Pullman. And the defendant is actually seen with his car at various businesses down there. This area is the confluence of the Clearwater River and the Snake River. Lewiston is Idaho's seaport. Large bodies of moving water down there. In addition to tracing the defendant's activities, as I've just outlined, on the 13th and leading up to the 13th, the state's evidence will show that following Sunday, November 13th, 2022, business records show that the defendant began searching for a K-bar knife and a K-bar knife sheath, as the state believes, to replace the one that was left at the scene of the murders. The evidence also will suggest that there were at least attempts by the defendant to delete or alter his purchase history on Amazon, where all these transactions had occurred. Later that week, the state's evidence will show that Mr. Kohberger went to what we would call DMV, motor vehicle licensing here in Idaho, in Pullman, to change his car registration from Pennsylvania to Washington. That's of note because Pennsylvania cars do not require a front license plate. The vehicles seen on the surveillance cameras of the defendant's car showed it didn't have a front license plate on it. At the time of the traffic stop by Deputy Duke in August, Pennsylvania plate, no front license plate. Mr. Kohberger proceeded to finish his semester of studies at Washington State University and returned to Pennsylvania for the holidays. Law enforcement at this point were aware of Mr. Kohberger, had been accessing information about him, were trying to find him. They located him in Pennsylvania, and they conducted what's called a trash pull. During the nighttime hours, agents of the FBI, who assisted immensely with this case, working with the sanitation department back in this neighborhood in Pennsylvania, took trash that had been set out on the street for collection, sent the contents of that from the Pennsylvania residence of the defendant's parents to the Idaho State Forensic Laboratory, where the lab experts there were able to identify DNA on a Q-tip as coming from the father of the person whose DNA was found on the knife sheath that was next to Madison Logan's body in the bed.
There's a documentary called The Idaho Student Murders. It's currently on Peacock. I watched it with my wife. We thoroughly enjoyed it. It gave a very good overview. I think it would have been very interesting to be a part one if there was a trial, but knowing now that there's not going to be a trial, it kind of takes on a different tone. I'll let you in on a little spoiler here. They explained that they actually had him under surveillance.
Yeah, we had in our prior episode, we showed him being pulled over multiple times as he made
Right.
his way back to Pennsylvania.
But for the trash pull, I've done hundreds of trash pulls. They're just
You still doing it?
yes, for various reasons. But he was spotted by the surveillance units putting his trash in another's trash can. So they pulled that trash from the other person's trash can. It's still abandoned property, so there's no issue with that.
Yeah, it's at the edge of the curtilage.
Yeah,
The
it just
courts
it
ruled on
makes
that a long time ago.
yeah, it makes it even more suspicious. And then I won't give away what's in the documentary, but when SWAT rushed in, he was definitely doing something with his own trash at that point.
The other thing that's interesting is that the only time I've really seen him move or do anything here or look even uncomfortable is when discussing the details of the investigation that led to his capture. Because I think that's the only part that he feels bad about, and kind of reminds me of BTK. Really didn't care,
Yeah.
and both of them were caught the same way. Was through genealogy.
Subsequently, an arrest warrant was issued here in Idaho, and a search warrant was issued in the state of Pennsylvania with the assistance not only of the FBI, but the Pennsylvania State Police. Mr. Kohberger was arrested at his parents' home to return to Idaho. Upon his return to Idaho, a DNA sample was taken from him, and it matched the DNA found on the knife sheath next to Maddie's body at the crime scene. I can tell the court and the public the weapon itself, the knife, has not yet been recovered. I can tell the court that the defendant's apartment in Pullman was searched, as well as his office. Spartan would be a kind characterization. There was virtually nothing there. Nothing of evidentiary value was found. And of course, we're now talking 6-8 weeks after the time of the killings. In Pennsylvania, the defendant's car was seized. It was actually pretty much disassembled internally. And it also had been cleaned. There was a bucket of cleaner right beside it. I think we can all look to our own cars, in those compartments in the doors. We try to keep them clean where you put stuff. There's always some degree of crud in there. They were spotless. Vince's car had been meticulously cleaned inside. And the state would present to the jury that that was part of the defendant's plan in covering up this. The defendant has studied crime. In fact, he did a detailed paper on crime scene processing when he was working on his pre-doctorate degrees, and he had that knowledge and skill. So, Your Honor, at the end, the state submits that the evidence that I've given just a quick overview of, and that to present in court would consume weeks, which the state is prepared to do and has been prepared to do, would show that as the defendant has just admitted and pleaded guilty on November 13th, 2022, excuse me, Mr. Kohberger entered the residence of 1122 King Road in Moscow, Idaho. He did that with the intent to kill. We will not represent that he intended to commit all of the murders that he did that night, but we know that that is what resulted, and that he then killed intentionally, willfully, deliberately, with premeditation, and with malice forethought, Manny Mogan, Kaylee Gonzalez, Ethan Chapin, and Santa Cruz. Thank you.
Thank you.
Back tears at the end, trying to get through it. Now we get to the interaction part, the are you guilty or are you not guilty part of this phase.
For the murder of Kaylee Gonzalez, how do you plead, guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
As to count 4, the first-degree murder of Xana Kernodle, a human being, how do you plead, guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
As to count 5, the first-degree murder of Ethan Chapin, a human being, how do you plead, guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
The court will find that the defendant understands the nature of the charges and each offense and the possible consequences to him of his guilty plea. Court finds that there is a factual basis for the plea and that finds the defendant believes the plea to be in his best interest. I find that the plea was given freely, voluntarily, and was intelligently made. I accept the plea. I direct that it be entered. I'll continue the matter for sentencing in this case. I think it was mentioned on the call Monday afternoon, the defense wishes to waive a pretrial investigation. Is that accurate?
Yes, Your Honor.
The state also?
Yes, Your Honor, the state does not believe pre-sentence investigation is needed given the evidence that is available. We want to, though, make sure that all of the victims have the opportunity to make statements to the court at sentencing.
That's going to be interesting.
Yeah.
I want to know, too, if he's, we covered at length the Sarah Boone, statement at her sentencing, which was really just an opportunity for her to give another in a long line of several manifestos. I have to wonder whether or not Bryan Kohberger will say anything in his defense, apologize, if he'll just say nothing at all. But it's going to be interesting to watch him be forced to sit there and listen to the friends and family of these 4 people. It's going to take all day, if not multiple days, to hear from all of these people and what they've lost and whether or not he'll care at all.
And when you have 4 very young lives that were cut short, I can understand the family's outrage. Kaylee's family has had a pretty strong social media presence from minute one, and they're pretty vocal about being outraged. They feel that I think it's in their statement, like verbatim, the state of Idaho has failed us. It's understandable that the emotions are very high with them, that they're never, ever going to see their daughter again. And she was, 21 years old, beautiful girl in her prime. I can completely understand where the family is outraged, but at the same time, I also see where the prosecutor is kind of weighing permanent options.
I get that the family was outraged because they had it set in their mind that nothing less than that standard of vengeance would do for the daughter that they loved, but they also are being spared something. There's a phenomenon which goes on in the criminal justice world that we've just seen recently. I've done a little bit of research on Bryan Kohberger, and there was a movement that I think was getting ready to burst to the surface once the trial started, which would have been the Free Bryan Kohberger movement. There were people out there who made remarks that the police were planting evidence, that there was a glove found outside the house, that a YouTuber, a content creator, somebody like us found this glove. What was that glove? Where did it come from? This idea that uh, there would have been another strategy by the defense of negation. Well, there was this other touch DNA that was found that never got tested. Never mind that, sending it off for uh, genealogical testing is very expensive and very costly, or this other trace amount of blood in the house that was never sent off for testing. Because again, it wasn't tied to any piece of critical evidence, and there was a lot of people in that house. And the state saved themselves a little bit of time and effort by using common sense to not test that. But the defense would have just said, well, the FBI was searching these databases in violation of their own policies, and they weren't testing this evidence, and this was a crime that shocked the nation, and they had to find somebody to hang this on, and Bryan Kohberger just happened to be this guy. And some of these theories and some of these things kind of came out of the woodwork. They came from people who wanted to deny the fact that Bryan Kohberger was the guy. And I have to wonder, John O'Keefe's family just went through this terrible ordeal over the last couple of years. What would the families of these 4 students go through had a cult movement come about that Bryan Kohberger was wrongfully being framed for this? I saw some of these things on social media, not so much recently, but this idea that Bryan Kohberger was not guilty. And in some sense, they were spared that trial, and in another sense, not to keep continuing to compare it to Karen Reed, but juries can decide whatever they want. And Bryan Kohberger has now said that he did these things. Can you imagine leaving his fate up to a jury that might have been bamboozled and set him free? What would that mean for our society? It would mean people were in danger. So I feel for them. But I think there's a greater interest in public safety to serve too, making sure that he never gets out again. And of course, not to go on another tangent, but I have all kinds of thoughts and feelings of what that means for the corrections world he's about to enter.
We saw it in our own comments, like in the Karen Reed series that we did. People were already speculating that she was being set up just like Bryan Kohberger was. And it's dangerous. Like this is the dangerous quote misinformation that they talk about. I've always been a proponent of free speech. Like, just let me say what I want to say and let people decide. But when it runs amok like this, there shouldn't be any regulation to it. But at the same time, you're right. Like, what kind of strain is that going to put on the family, and what kind of strain is that going to put on the prosecution? All these wild defense theories, in just the same as in any murder trial or murder case. Just like we were trying to say with Karen Reed, the defense's job is to do nothing but poke holes. They're just going to poke holes, and they're going to talk about, like how he used to just lose himself in the park at night. And, like that's what he was doing out at 4 in the morning that morning. And he has, people that can testify to that, or that he, just all these other things. You're right about like the process of collection of DNA and the genealogy. I'm sure that's
They were going to make all of that an issue.
yeah, that's so a lot of issues would have been raised, and you're still kind of in a sense rolling the dice. We're going to watch the video where the prosecutor lays out the case that they had. You're still rolling the dice though, and you don't know what the jury's going to think. You don't know what you know it's quite a big undertaking, and the families deserve to have the full extent of the law, or just the 100%. But there are also calculations that district attorney, or that elected DA had to make. And John, it's another example of why local elections matter. The true cost of a murder in the United States is estimated at $9 million to $17 million for a murder. The victim costs are like 5 to 8 million when you take into account lost lifetime income, like the emotional toll on families, people having to go into counseling, medical bills, because people, murder victims don't necessarily die right away sometimes. And then 1.5 to 4 million in the criminal justice system, to include the investigative costs, trials, prosecution. Corrections and incarceration is a low percentage, but it's 500,000 to 2 million for something like that, for one murder. And then the lost tax revenue of not just the victim, but of everybody around them. Like, there are people that are so affected by this case, whether they're family or not, that won't leave the house, that are too afraid to go anywhere. And that bleeds right into the community ripple effect. Like, there's policing costs, neighborhood decline. Once a murder happened there, they completely wiped that house out. They tore it down to its foundation. Had they not, I mean, there would have been an extra cost of having police sitting outside, or just the neighbors calling constantly, because it's become like the Jim Morrison's grave of the year 2025. Hopefully you get that reference, but there's a greater cost when it comes to any murder case, whether it's this, Karen Reed, O.J. Simpson, it doesn't matter. But a typical case like this is going to cost high, and the references are in there. The Department of Justice and other academic institutions have come to that number.
When it comes to the compromise of giving him life in prison too, I think we also have to recognize that people who are facing lethal injection, that's a de facto life sentence. There's a guy in Idaho right now. His name's Thomas Eugene Creech. He was apprehended 50 years ago. He was given the death penalty all that time ago, and they're having trouble now actually being able to execute him. They can't get his veins to stand up enough to put a needle in it, and until they can figure that out, he'll just continue to be in there. So even if we were getting
It's created the alternate version, which is the firing squad. Like,
right, that has that and nitrogen is being used in various other states like that. But just the amount of time that a typical person on death row has to appeal these things and to stall out, it ends up being a life sentence anyway. And I think if maybe we just forego all that, and you can also give someone a sentence later that can be reduced later anyway. So we could go to the trouble of securing a conviction and giving him capital punishment, only for someone to undermine the jury and process later. I know, Drew, that you don't appreciate this, but like, there was a jury back in the 90s that decided that the Menendez brothers should be in prison for the rest of their lives, and that's being undermined. Whether or not you think it's right or wrong, someone today is making a new decision that changes a decision that was made 30 years ago. So we could go to all this. We could go to all kinds of lengths to make sure that Kohberger gets the death penalty, and it could just be undone later. I guess I'm glad to finally have the resolution. The only thing that's strange to me is that we're not getting any kind of indication from him as to why he would have done this. This is something that's going to make this case go down in the annals of true crime, as to why this guy decided to go into their house in the middle of the night and do these terrible things. 4 consecutive life sentences for the rest of his life. Now free to assault people, spit on people, and do every heinous crime up to murder without there being any really recourse for that, because any trial for any offense less than that would just be a waste of time and effort and energy and expense for the state. So I feel bad for the people that are going to be around Bryan Kohberger for the rest of his life.
right. So plus, I think it's big that he waives all right to
Appeals.
appeal. So
Yeah.
he's really, really, truly got nothing to lose. This is like heavy stuff that you're bringing out. Like, he can go into prison and just do whatever he wants to do. Like, what are you going to
As
do?
long as he's not killing somebody and he could be faced with the death penalty again for a new murder charge, there's no longer any recourse for any crime that he could commit inside the walls. And don't fool yourselves. You can break the law inside of prison.
Oh yeah,
You can do any crime you can commit in your community. You could do it in prison to another human being. And now there's no recourse, because This guy's already serving 4 life sentences. If you get him on aggravated assault or attempted murder, what's the point of going through a trial? You're not gonna be able to sentence him to any more meaningful time. So the state's attorney's office is not gonna do with anything with that. They'll handle administratively, which means a slap on the wrist for him. There's even the ACLU and other bodies now are moving to restrict how much, administrative punishment can be dealt out to inmates in prison. So he's moving into a place of he'll be behind the bars, but he'll be free to do whatever he wants to do there.
Yeah, and be very comfortable doing it without any repercussion. He can he's free to do what he wants. So let me ask you this, John, from in your perspective. I know that you have an alternate podcast called Hard Time, where you call upon your experience as a corrections officer with somebody who's in corrections, not incarcerated, but actually works in corrections. Um, what's your prediction of how he's going to be viewed or treated in prison?
He is gonna have some notoriety, just because he gained the national eye, but, as far as spree killers go, I don't think anyone's gonna view him as being particularly tough since he had to sneak in the middle of the night and, take out a bunch of kids while they were sleeping. You gotta remember that even in Idaho, don't get any preconceptions about Idaho just because it's, some state in the middle of the country that you've never even thought about going to unless it was on vacation. They've got dangerous people there.
Yeah.
They've got gang members there and people that have killed more people than that. And they're dangerous people in Idaho. He's probably someone who's going to keep a relatively low profile. They'll keep a close eye on him, and then, like any other celebrity inmate, eventually he'll just sort of have kind of a legendary status. But he strikes me as somebody that's just gonna be quiet and kind of fit in. Uh, that's just my guess, but like I said, with him being in the position that he's in, he could do anything he wants, and he could potentially be very dangerous if he's that type of person. And the kinda guy that kills 4 people for no reason, evidently, I still think that he could be dangerous.
Well, think too. First of all, Coeur d'Alene, if I'm not mistaken, at one point, like maybe in the early '90s, was kind of a haven for white supremacists. If I'm not mistaken.
I've heard that. Everybody says that. Everybody gets on the white supremacists, but it's like, you know, are we ever gonna talk about the Crips and the Bloods and the things that did
No, no, no.
before we get on the white supremacists? But yes, I mean, I guess you could say that Idaho has that reputation. I don't think Bryan Kohberger is gonna run afoul of them. I don't think he's gonna be.
No, but it lends to the danger in.
Yeah,
But
you
the
have
other
those
thing
you have those
too
claims
is
in there.
just the same in the same theme that you're saying. Like he can get away with anything but murder right now. Why would you say anything in open court? Um, like apologies aside, whatever. Why would you say anything? Because it's not going to change anything. It's not going to change any outcomes. Like in
And I don't think he has that in him. I think that would be insincere, and there's no reason for him to appeal to the victims' families at all.
that's exactly what I'm saying. Like
That's why if he does say anything to them, I think it'll be shocking. I think he'll have no statement.
I think the moment I look forward to the most is to watch the victim impact statements and his reactions to the victim impact statements. I have the feeling that he's probably got that shut off valve that he doesn't have to feel the emotion and but we all will. We support the families of the victims, obviously, but it's a unfortunate circumstance. He's going to be in prison for the rest of his life. He's got to do 10 years first for the burglary, and then he
His
can
first
start
crime against the house itself.
right. Then he starts serving the 4 consecutive life sentences for uh, taking out those 4 wonderful kids. But listen, I can't stress enough. The documentary like shows the side of the children, they're not children. They were adults. They were 21 years old, but we look at them as kids because they were still in college. But um, you get to hear from their family members and their friends, and it's a really humanizing experience. It was very well done. I strongly suggest you watch the documentary.
Yeah. Also, watch the episode that we already did on it if you want to see our full takedown on the entire case, including the 911 call, which was critical to understanding a lot of confusion of what was going on at the very beginning of this case. Go ahead and go back and watch that here. Check out some of our other videos. If you want to be a part of the show, you can always call in 848 COM 911. That's 848-266-6911. Drew, if you want, I do have a voicemail I could play.
I would love it.
Hey, Jon and Drew, this is Jim from Florida, calling about the episode where you went over the closing argument of the defense attorney. Yes, that was an excellent, excellent closing. I agree with Jon when he said the attorney wanted to get the jury to repeat after him, because I was thinking the same thing as Jon. And a good attorney is masterful at changing people's minds like that, getting them to sway their opinion. Drew, I'm on your side. If there's any type of police activity in front of any cop's house, especially in a small town, especially if everybody knows each other, why didn't somebody go out or somebody knock on the door and say, "Hey, do you realize what's going on in your front yard?" And you would think that the occupants of the house, it being a small town, would kind of come out and say, "Hey, who's involved?" Because they probably know them. Something fishy going on there, but we may never know the real story. Keep up the good work, guys. Hope everything's going well. Bye.
One thing I thought was interesting on this in terms of, what we just heard from this Idaho prosecutor. First of all, I wanted to mention, his voice breaks up as he mentions the 4 students that were slain. Everybody was trashing on Hank Brennan for his role in the Karen Reed murder trial. Do we not realize that Hank Brennan was representing John O'Keefe and their family, and that maybe he had some broken up feelings about it? There was no compassion for Hank Brennan, of course, because there was so much hate for anyone who dared to think differently about the blessed Karen Reed. But the other thing that was interesting is that you could clearly tell that he was looking at his documents and he was reading from what would have been his opening statements. He was saying that the prosecution is going to show this. And what was interesting is that he made some concessions, and he said, we don't know what happened to the knife. We realize that the cell tower connections aren't definitive, but they kind of place him in the area. We don't know that necessarily means he was at the house. It shows you that in any prosecution and any investigation, it's not possible to know everything, right? He didn't know what happened to the murder weapon. He didn't know whether or not these other occasions in which Bryan Kohberger was in the neighborhood, whether he happened to stop by at the house. We can't know everything. We don't know what happened to John O'Keefe. Doesn't mean that Bryan Kohberger didn't kill these 4 people. At the risk of pissing off the entire world, it doesn't mean that Karen Reed didn't kill John O'Keefe. You can't know everything in an investigation, but a defense attorney can make it seem like that's the standard. That proof beyond reasonable doubt means that you know every single thing in a case. Drew?
So just 2 related observations. One being, I said it on the show a couple times. I'll say it one more time. I want you, if you disagree with us, more power to you. That's fine. Like, we welcome the challenge and, hold our feet to the fire. And if we don't explain it away, then we don't explain it away. That's, you know what I mean? Like, but watch every single episode of Dateline that you can think of or remember, or that's available to you, and tell me at some point the defense attorney doesn't make reference to police misconduct, police
Ineptitude.
police missing reports, police planting evidence. It happens in every case. It's exactly what I've been trying to tell you.
And they would have made it an issue here.
They would have definitely made it an issue here. And the other thing is, I see a lot of comparisons of how, they took, so long to develop a suspect here, but there was a ton of pressure. Like, I policed in a university area, not for a university police department, but I policed in a university area, and you have no idea how much pressure there is to get stuff solved because of the unsettling feeling or the unsettling cloud that comes over the parents of kids who live off campus, who had their car broken into and their laptop stolen. And they start putting pressure on the law enforcement agency, on the university, on everything else. So, I see these comparisons where Well, they developed the suspect in 16 hours, and they never looked back for Karen Reed. They made up their minds in investigative television and all this other stuff. Then the other side of it is, oh my God, how did it take so long to develop a suspect and to make an arrest? And
Apparently, there's a butter zone, right? It
kind of
has to be more than 16, but less than 24, I guess.
yeah, and by the way, speaking of television, like if you ever wanted to watch a show called The First 48, it's a show specifically about major city homicide units, and they take you through an investigation. Very interesting show. It used to be on A&E. I don't know where it is now, if it's still on. But the opening tagline of this whole thing is, if you don't develop your lead within the first 48 hours, the statistics will show that the entire case will go cold. So I guess it's supposed to be somewhere between 16 and 48 hours. Like, once you're led down a path and you have a suspect, we have solved homicides in 15 minutes. Like, you can't claim just because the short amount of time that it was investigative tunnel vision. You can claim that they didn't investigate or they didn't eliminate as many as they should have. That's a valid claim. But you can't, just because they developed the suspect within 16 hours and ended up charging her, make that the entire investigation. That's not what happened. That wasn't the entire investigation wasn't done in 16 hours. They just had their suspect developed within 16 hours, and that's common. It's very common in major crimes, major violent crimes, robberies, murders, things of a male and female nature that you can't say on YouTube, but you know, developing your suspect and following your lead is exactly what you're supposed to be doing. So all these people that have made this conclusion because the defense attorney in the other case says, "Oh my God, it's 16 hours. They had investigative tunnel vision." It doesn't make it so. It doesn't make it true.
You're just damned if you do and damned if you don't.
Right.
So look for us on social media. Pick out your favorite one. You can find us there. Follow us on the Comm Center and look for more content. You can look on our channel. We have tons of videos for you to watch. If you like what you see here, make sure you check out our entire library. If you're mad about what you saw here, guess what? We already talked about what you're mad about in another video. Go ahead and look for it here. Click on that and watch all of that. Andrew? It's been a pleasure.
It's definitely been a pleasure. Look, we definitely want to get back to what
Show's over.